In our last survey lecture we covered Peter's confession of Christ, the foretelling of Jesus' death and resurrection, the price of following Jesus, the transfiguration on the mount, the healing of a possessed boy, and the miracle of the coin in the fish. In this survey lecture we will continue in Jesus' third year of ministry as we cover the chronological events regarding many of his discourses, including who is the greatest, those for and against Christ, the stumbling blocks, the lost sheep, accountability, and forgiveness. We will begin with the discourse regarding who is the greatest. As Jesus and his apostles continue in ministry, they travel to Capernaum where the disciples begin to argue among themselves who should be the greatest among them. Settling in a house, he asks the disciples what they were disputing among themselves on the way. The disciples not saying anything because they were disputing about who would be the greatest. Perceiving their thoughts in their hearts, Jesus sits and calls the 12 to himself, and they ask who the greatest among them is. Jesus replies by teaching them, if any man desires to be first, he shall be last of all. Whoever is least among you shall be servant of all. Calling and taking a child in his arms before the disciples, he teaches them that one must be converted and become as children or they will not enter the kingdom of heaven, and whoever humbles themselves as a child is the greatest in the kingdom. And that whoever receives such a child in his name also receives him, and whoever receives him also receives him who sent him. Mark's account words this a bit different by writing, whoever receives him, does not receive him, but him who sent him. Matthew's account finishes this discourse, that whoever offends one of these little ones who believes, it would be better for that person if a millstone was hung around their neck and drowned in the sea. The Apostle John then informs Jesus that they had seen another person casting out devils in his name, and they forbid him to do so because they did not follow them. Jesus responds by telling them not to forbid the man, because no one who does miracles in his name can speak evil of him, and that whoever is not against them is for them. Continuing, Jesus teaches them that whoever gives them water in his name because they belong to Christ, shall not lose their reward. And seemingly reiterating what he taught earlier, whoever offends one of these little ones who believes, it would be better if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were cast into the sea. Continuing on his discourses, he begins to teach the disciples on removing those things which cause stumbling and offense, telling them, woe to the world because of offenses, and that it is needed that offenses come, but woe to whom they come to. If your right hand causes offense, cut it off, for it is better to enter life maimed than to have two hands and go to hell, being cast into everlasting fire where the fire is not quenched and the worm does not die. And if your foot causes offense, cut it off, it is better to enter life crippled than to have 2 feet and go to hell, where the fire is not quenched and the worm does not die. And if your eye causes offense, pluck it out and cast it away. For it is better to enter life with 1 eye than with 2 eyes and be cast into hell in everlasting fire, where the fire is not quenched and the worm does not die. Everyone will be salted with fire, and every sacrifice will be salted with salt, and salt is good, but if it loses saltiness, how can you make it salty again? Therefore, we are to have salt in ourselves and peace with one another. He then commands them not to despise one of these little ones, because their angels in heaven always see the face of his Father in heaven. For the Son of Man came to save that which is lost. Continuing, Jesus teaches the discourse on the 100 sheep. He asks them what they think. If a man has 100 sheep and one of them goes astray, does he not leave the 99 and go to the mountains to seek the one that strayed? And when he finds it, he rejoices more over the sheep which is found more than over the 99 who did not stray. It is not the Father's will in heaven for one of these little ones to perish. Moving on to the discourse regarding accountability, Jesus tells them that if a brother trespasses against you, you are to go tell him his fault between yourselves alone. And if they hear you, then you have gained your brother. However, if they do not hear you, then you are to take 1 or 2 witnesses, so that on the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word can be established. If that brother refuses to hear, then you are to tell it to the church, and if that brother refuses the church, then you are to let that brother be as a heathen and publican. What you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and what you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And if 2 agree on earth regarding what you ask for, it will be done by the Father in heaven, for where 2 or 3 are gathered in his name, he is there with them. Peter then came and asked Jesus, how often should someone forgive his brother if he sins against him? 7 times. Jesus, teaching forgiveness, tells Peter, not 7 times, but even until 70 times 7. It is with this discourse that we will end our brief survey lecture. In review, we covered Jesus' discourses regarding who is the greatest, those for and against Christ, the stumbling blocks, the lost sheep, accountability, and forgiveness. In our next survey lecture, we will observe the chronological events regarding Jesus being rejected, the example of discipleship, his teaching at the Feast of Tabernacles, the division of the people, the adulterous woman, and the declaration of his authority.